bell tinkled, clear and distinct. The young woman who climbed out of the carriage had the same red hair as Gyukayu. A veil worked with silver embroidery hid her face. She wore a robe of wonderful shining silk. Gyukayu wondered how old she was. The girl was supposed to be her niece, but she did not recall having any such young relatives. All her nephews and nieces had been older than her and very mean, yet her own brother Gyukuo swore this girl was his daughter, so it must be so. She had to go along with it. Lady Gyukayu, someone said behind her. It was Kokuyu, the middle of a trio of sisters who served as her ladies-in-waiting. She gave her mistress a worried look. Don't fret, dear one. Are we prepared to receive her? Yes, ma'am. Gyukayu was at one of the emperor's villas. She had received special permission to meet her niece here outside the court proper. No consort was allowed to leave the rear palace, but Gyukayu was the empress. She had certain rights. The young woman in the beautiful robe approached with graceful footsteps and knelt before Gyukayu. Lady Gyukayu, I believe this is the first time we've met. My name is Yakin. Raise your head. You must be tired from such a long journey. For today, rest and regain your strength here in this villa. Gyukayu smiled at Yakin. She could see the girl's eyes behind the veil, deep green like her own. Everything from the color of her skin to the cast of her face spoke to a prominent strain of foreign blood. She was quite charming on first impression, in fact. She had an innocence about her, still room to grow and mature, accompanied by the anxiousness of someone venturing into a world they knew little of. Deep within those emerald eyes, though, could be seen a determination working to assert itself. They were much alike. Yes, Gyukayu had looked much the same when she had first arrived in the capital, first come to the rear palace. Did this girl, too, harbour some private resolution? Let her. Gyukayu would attend to her own business. How would you like your meal? We can make it in the style of the Western capital for you. Or would you prefer to try the local cuisine? Gyukayu gave Yakin a teasing smile, and it enveloped the girl, who smiled back uncomfortably. Her niece was here from the west, but why had she come? Would she try to gain His Majesty's imperial affection now that Gyukayu's former place was vacant? Or did she have her eye on the emperor's younger brother? For Gyukayu's purposes it didn't matter. She took Yakin's hand and felt her niece stiffen. You are so cold and your skin is so dry, she said. Let me get you some moisturizer. The sea air is simply terrible for the skin. The girl was openly wary of Gyukayu. If this was an act, it was a superb one. If it wasn't, it only showed that they hadn't spent long teaching her the tricks of gaining a person's heart and mind. There was never enough time to teach a consort to be all the things she ought to know, dancing and singing and politics. Gyukayu took the moisturizer from Kokuyu, then rubbed some on her own hand to demonstrate that it was safe. Her niece still looked doubtful. Perhaps she was simply that anxious. That was all right as far as Gyukayu was concerned. Let her be as suspicious as she wanted. Gyukayu wrapped her in a smile as soft as silk. She would wrap her in layer after layer of smiles until every thorn and every needle she might have was covered. She would take the child into her bosom and hold her gently. Gyukayu rubbed her niece's hand. Some might consider it unseemly, but warmth returned to Yakin's fingers. Kokuyu was frowning, but she did not argue with Gyukayu. Gyukayu was glad that Hongyang, her chief lady-in-waiting and by rights should have been here, wasn't present. Gyukayu had asked her to take care of some other business. She felt a little guilty, but this would be easier without her. Gyukayu's job was to smile, to never let that smile slip or fade. That was her one weapon. Her father Gyukyuan had found it and taught her to wield it. Chapter 1 Return to the Western capital. Maomao wiped her brow as she looked out of the carriage. The sun pounded down, baking the earth. The people who followed behind the vehicle on foot wore conical travelling hats, but they wouldn't be saved from the reflected light. It was still strong enough to tan the skin. So a year later I'm back, Maomao thought. The last time she'd come, it had been a little earlier in the year and not quite so hot. At least there was no humidity. The sweat she wiped at dried quickly, but it was still blazing. The quack doctor had promptly succumbed to the heat and was curled up in a corner of the carriage. What this place needs is a little greenery. That would make things better, Chu observed. She held out a leather pouch of water flavoured with the rind of some sort of citrus fruit. Even the lukewarm drink was better than nothing on Maomao's parched throat. You've been here before, right, Miss Maomao? Yes, last year. She certainly hadn't expected to be back again this year. Most commoners never took a trip this long in their entire lives. But you weren't here very long, right? Let Miss Chu show you around this time. You can see the sights. Enjoy yourself. There was a gleam in her eyes. The less something had to do with work, the more eager she was to do it. No, thank you, I have a job to do. Maomao would have loved to go sightseeing, to finally see the entire city and sample all the medicinal herbs and other plant life for sale at this nexus of trade. But there was one person she had to keep an eye on at all times. Jinshi, that son of A. Even now the memory made her blood boil and she suspected it always would. Miss Maomao, you look tense, Chu said and began massaging Maomao's cheeks. It seemed like somehow someone always ended up doing that. Oh, do I? I'm sure they'd be perfectly happy for you to go out all day if you told them it was to inspect your surroundings. Just make sure you call me when you do. She just wants me to be her excuse. Chu was easy to talk to and better than any of the other potential minders who might be assigned to her, but still, oh me, oh my. We've been talking so much that we've arrived. A town of stone and brick came into view. It was dotted with green trees and a lake sparkled in the distance. Awnings fluttered here and there to keep off the sun. The carriage rolled right on toward a great mansion. For a moment Maomao thought they were going to the same house she'd been to last year, but then she realized it was the one next door to that. So this is the administrative office, Chu said, looking at a stone plaque on the front of the building. The carriage stopped at the gate. The other physicians were already waiting inside. Ah, is that everybody? Said the dark-skinned Dr. Yu, waving to them. Okay, Miss Maomao, Miss Chu has other things to do. So right, thank you very much, don't mention it. Chu pitter-pattered away into the administrative building. Over here, Dr. Yu called. He was standing with Tianyu and one of the other physicians. Maomao and the quack went over to him with Lihaku following at an unobtrusive distance. Have you been here before, Dr. Yu? Tianyu drawled. Yes, plenty of times. That was before this was a bureaucratic office, though. I'm from the western capital myself, you know, a native son of Isei province. I know where the eastern villa is, more or less. Huh, said Tianyu, who didn't sound very interested in the answer despite having asked the question. Before it was an office, huh? Maomao thought. As they walked inside, she pondered what it might have been used for before. It did indeed feel more like a rich person's house than a proper administrative building. Maybe it's a mansion they confiscated from someone who wasn't paying their taxes. That was entirely her imagination, but it was enough to pass the time until they arrived at the villa. The medical supplies were already there. What should we do next? The serious-looking physician asked Dr. Yu. Let's see. The plan is for us to split into 3 groups, just like we did on the ships. The Moon Prince will be at Lord Jiaokuo's annex. Grand Commandant Kan will be here in the administrative office, and our man Lu from the Board of Rights will be in Lord Jiaokuo's main house. The good doctor seemed to refer to one of those men very differently from the others. Maybe they were close personally or perhaps in rank. Should we split up into the same groups we did on the boats then? The other doctor asked. I think something a little different today, Dr. Yu said. He grabbed Tianyu and pushed him toward Maomao and the quack. I'm with them, sir, Tianyu asked. I was sure I would be with Dr. Li again. Maomao agreed. Li was evidently the remaining physician. The name was also extremely common. So much so that it was no help in telling people apart, and those surnamed Li often found themselves called by their full names. Lihaku was a good example of that. We tried to consider all possible factors when we made the decision. You can be with Dr. Li provided you can mind your mouth. I heard about your little mistakes on the ship. Evidently Tianyu had spoken disrespectfully to some high officials, but I might be just as rude anywhere else. Where am I going? To the annex. I'm going to be in the administrative office here, and Dr. Li will be at the main residence. That would mean I'm in the same building as the imperial younger brother, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that only have the potential to make things worse? That implied Maomao would also be in Jinshi's building. She might have guessed as much. Hoping to get a chance to do an exam on the Moon Prince. Good luck. I doubt you'll even see him much. Dr. Yu smacked Tianyu on the shoulder. Tianyu rubbed it painfully. Dr. Yu continued, you'll make the perfect group. Nine Yang is good at mixing medicines, which is precisely what you aren't, Tianyu, but you are the best surgeon among the new group. This will be the perfect opportunity for you to learn from each other. That would be great if Nine Yang were here, Maomao thought, but she didn't bother correcting him. She had decided that if it didn't actively harm her, she could live with it. She glanced at the quack doctor. He doesn't even seem to be on the list, and he didn't seem to realize it either. I only hope I can be a good teacher, the quack said, fidgeting. Maomao looked away from him. Looking forward to it, partner, Tianyu said, slapping Maomao on the back. We are not partners. Maomao stood before the quack doctor, who flushed with embarrassment and hid behind her. I look forward to working with you, big guy, Tianyu said. Why yes, it'll be my pleasure, the quack said. Tianyu evidently didn't take him very seriously. You may be with a new group, but your job hasn't changed. Doctors look after their patients and nothing else. Each group will have a junior official assigned to it to act as a messenger if anything comes up. Do not hesitate to use them. It was nice working with Dr. Yu. He made things simple. Maomao knew the personnel on this trip had been selected for their ability to adapt to a rapidly changing situation, but he had a special ease that must have come from being on his home soil. You heard him. Shall we get going? Tianyu asked, picking up his stuff. Administrative office, main building and annex, 2 of the 3 belonged to Jiaokuo outright, which served to demonstrate how powerful he was. The office and the main house were right next to each other. The annex was a 5-minute walk away. Each of them fronted the main street, but inside the administrative building the hubbub outside was hardly audible. It was just that big. The walls and the trees outside probably also helped block out the noise. Maomao and her 3 companions were joined by the junior official who would serve as their messenger. The 5 of them were shown to their building by a man who looked to be a local. As they stepped out the gate, they got a good view of the town. Lihaku once again maintained a respectful distance, but Tianyu kept glancing back at him. Maomao thought it did seem sort of odd, a few ordinary physicians being given a bodyguard, to say nothing of the fact that the quack himself was personally in charge of Jinqi's care. Tianyu was too sharp not to wonder why Maomao and the quack were being entrusted with the imperial younger brother. She worried about when he might start asking questions, but for the time being she tried to act like everything was normal. She could at least play innocent until he specifically pressed her about it. My, isn't this exciting? If the quack had still had his moustache, it would have been all a quiver. He wasn't a particularly brave eunuch, but at the moment his timidity seemed to be outweighed by his excitement at seeing the western capital. Tianyu, too, was looking everywhere at once. His expression never changed, though. He seemed less like he was having fun and more like he was taking careful stock of everything. Maomao was never sure what to make of this guy. She could never tell what he was thinking. She had figured out, though, that he was quick to latch on to anything that piqued his curiosity. If she knew what that was, she might be able to anticipate how he'd react, but she still didn't know what he found interesting. Tianyu said, tilting his head quizzically as they left the office. Maomao wondered what was up, and then she saw a familiar face. The owner of the face seemed to recognize them too because he trotted over. It's been much too long, he said with a respectful bow of the head and a gentle smile. It was the pretty boy, Rikusen. He was the freak strategist's former aide. That's right. Maomao heard he transferred to the western capital. He was more tanned than the last time Maomao had seen him, no doubt from the strong sunlight in these parts. 2 attendants walked behind him. It has, sir, said Maomao. Yeah, haven't seen you in a bit, said Tianyu at almost the same time. Only the quack was left out of the loop. He looked at Maomao as if to ask who this person was. Do you 2 know each other? Maomao asked, looking from Rikusen to Tianyu and back. Yes, in that I never forget someone I've met. Rikusen smiled. Maomao sensed something tired in the expression. She also noticed that his clothes were dusty and there was mud all over his shoes. The first thing they told us when we started at court was to learn what the strategist's aide looked like, Tianyu said. Ah, I see, Maomao said. Tianyu might have greeted Rikusen familiarly, but he didn't actually know or care that much about him. The quack, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably, feeling shy around this stranger. For once, Maomao couldn't just let everyone else do the talking. This is the master physician. I've come to the western capital to assist him, she said. Master physician? Rikusen asked with a puzzled look at the quack. Oh, his name. His name is Adam. She had almost forgotten it again. She thought it was Gen, but she decided not to say it aloud. Instead she said, if I tell you he is the physician who served many years at the rear palace, would you know who I mean? Ah, neatly done. Rikusen clapped his hands. Yes, is this him? That was a close one, I almost forgot. The quack was a body double for her own father, Liu Men, and he was being treated as if he were his more august counterpart. Rikusen, for his part, would surely be familiar with Liu Men, who was the freak strategist's uncle. He would probably also grasp that the quack was the only physician in the rear palace. Never know if the walls might have eyes or ears. They were still technically in Li, but the western capital was as good as foreign territory. More to the point, both of Rikusen's attendants appeared to be locals. Maomao couldn't afford to say anything careless. She would have to watch how she spoke. Maomao didn't have anything particular to talk about with Rikusen, and she was keen to get out of there before anyone gave the game away. I'm sure you're busy, Master Rikyusen. I apologize for taking up your time, she said. Not at all. I just returned from traveling for work. It took me quite a ways out, but I knew you all must be arriving soon, so I hurried back. I never expected my timing to be so perfect. He smiled broadly, but it couldn't hide the mud on the hem of his robe. It was dry now, but it was obvious that it had originally been quite dark and rich soil. Was he out in the fields for some reason? The western capital was a dry place. Puddles were not a common sight on the roads here. Even if there had been puddles, the dust would have been whiter, lacking in nutrients. The only place he could have picked up fertile earth like what was clinging to his outfit was in a field that had been watered. Maybe he was coming back from whatever village was closest to the water. He hurried to get back and hadn't had time to worry about how he looked, so nobody told him exactly when they were going to arrive. Even with a lengthy trip, she would have expected Rikyusen to know at least that much. I must be on my way, said Rikyusen. I'm afraid if I stand and chat for too long, my former boss might notice me. I'll see you again. He looked like there was something more he would have wished to say, but he must have been too busy. Tianyu, who knew who he meant by his former boss, snickered. Only the quack doctor was left entirely in the dark, and he spent the entire conversation looking sad. Maomao would have to explain who Rikyusen was while they were on their way to their destination. She found herself with a lot to think about, but she also remembered what Dr. Yu had said to them. Doctors look after their patients and nothing else. Maomao was an apothecary. She would do an apothecary's job and nothing else. Chapter 2 Boss and Former Boss. Rikyusen heaved a sigh as he returned to his room. It was currently a chamber of the administrative building that he had appropriated as his living quarters. Is this purely about making my life hard? He muttered, shucking off his sand and mud-covered outfit. It was quite a while ago that Rikyusen had suggested a tour of the farming villages. Gyukuo had only approved the idea a few days earlier. Rikyusen had gone, but an unsettling premonition had brought him hurrying back, and now here he was. When I left for the villages, everyone told me they were going to arrive substantially later than expected. These were the visitors from the capital he had encountered moments ago. He had to admit he'd never expected his former superior's esteemed daughter to be among the entourage. Of course Master Lacan came, Rikyusen mused. Even the sea-sickening prospect of ship travel wouldn't have deterred him from joining this trip. Rikyusen found the idea faintly amusing, with all due respect to the esteemed daughter Maomao. He had been told his former boss would arrive in about 10 days, so he set aside the 5 days before that for his trip to the farming villages. But then Rikyusen brushed off his overrobe, getting sand everywhere. He would have loved to wash properly, but there was no time. There was hardly even a moment to wipe himself down. His only choice was to take an incense cake and daub some around his neck. In these parts, incense usually meant either perfume or a cake like this one. Rikyusen had only one of each on hand. One was a perfume Gyukuo had given him as a joke, while the cake was one he'd been hard-sold on while walking around town. That was his choice of incense today. A cheap product like this was perfect. Incense in the western capital tended to have strong fragrances, so something cheap that didn't smell quite as much was ideal. He rubbed in just enough perfume to mask the smell of sweat. As a final touch, he pasted a smile on his face. A smile was essential for doing business, his mother had told him. Never let it slip in front of a customer. Rikyusen wondered what Gyukuo would think to see him back so much earlier than expected. Things could get a little awkward if his former boss was there, but that was how it went. He cinched his belt and left the room. It's been some time, sir, Rikyusen said, forcing himself to act completely natural as he entered the hall. Gyukuo and his subordinates were there, along with the guests, enjoying a light meal. Servants bustled in and out with the food. It was too early for dinner, but the offerings looked sumptuous all the same. Rikyusen recognized all the guests naturally. He wouldn't forget them. The stubbly man with the monocle was Lacan. His former superior, he would know him anywhere. Beside Lacan sat his aide, Onsu. He had been around since before Rikyusen served Lacan. He distinctly remembered Onsu coming to him with tears of gratitude when Rikyusen took over. Onsu was a capable man, but he had an unfortunate tendency to draw life's short straws. He might as well have resigned himself to this the moment he found his way into Lacan's orbit. Onsu saw Rikyusen come in. He gave a slight bow and whispered to Lacan. Lacan looked at Rikyusen with the same vacant expression he always wore. If Onsu hadn't said something, he probably would never have realized Rikyusen was there. Rikyusen was sometimes curious exactly what he looked like to the strategist. Lacan beckoned Rikyusen over, but he wasn't sure if he should approach the strategist out of the blue. He looked to Gyukuo. The interim ruler of the western capital waved at him from his place of honor at the table to go pay his respects. Rikusen felt very awkward indeed.